A good Erev Shabbos, a good Erev Yom Tif. I wanted to take a few minutes and share with you a few stories that I came across in recent days, reviewing and looking up insights and stories and points to elucidate in the Haggadah and the Pesach story. These are stories that you can use, or you can tell them at your Seder. You can discuss them. You can do with them whatever you like. But they touched me in a certain way, so I thought I would share them with you. At the beginning of the Seder, towards the beginning of the Seder, when we're into Magid, when we're telling the story of Yetzias Mitzrayim, we tell a well-known story about a bunch of rabbis sitting around in Bnei Brak at their Seder, telling the Seder story, just like we do. It's about Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Yoshua, Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, Rabbi Akiva, and Rabbi Tarfon. So they're sitting in Bnei Brak, and if you remember the story, or you'll soon see it in your Haggadah, they stay up all night telling the story about the the Exodus from Egypt, coming out of Mitzrayim, until their students come and say, "Teachers, our rabbis, it's time for the morning Shema. You made the Seder all night. You told the story all night." So the question that I never stopped to ask about this, maybe you thought of it just didn't occur to me, is that why are these great Jewish leaders, why are these great sages sitting around in Bnei Brak, which is not the place to be? Where are they supposed to be? They're supposed to be in the temple, in Yerushalayim. That's where Pesach really happens, with the Korban Pesach, with the bringing the Paschal offering, and celebrating with the entire Jewish people. So nowadays, it doesn't seem strange to us to sit and around the table and tell stories until late into the evening, early into the morning. But why were these guys there? Why were they in Bnei Brak? Why weren't they in Yerushalayim, where they belong? So let's think about it very carefully. What's the time frame for when this story took place? It is the very year after the destruction of the Second Temple. So just a few months before, they had lived through, about 8 months before, on Tisha B'Av, they had lived through, experienced, they were eyewitnesses to the Chorban, the destruction, the national catastrophe of the loss of our temple, the sacking of Jerusalem by the Romans, and the takeover of all of the province, all of the land of Israel, by the Roman army. It was a catastrophe. Many people had lost relatives, soldiers had died, many were starving, others were homeless. We can be sure that these people, these leaders that we're speaking about, Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Yoshua, and the rest, were bearing the burden, carrying the heavy weight of the suffering of the Jewish people. Probably, I would assume, for the first time in their lives this year, when this story took place, they were celebrating Pesach not as it's supposed to be, with the temple, with the Korban Pesach, with the priest, with the Levites singing. They were trying to celebrate as best they could without the Beis HaMikdash, without the temple. They were in Bnei Brak because there was no point to go to Yerushalayim anymore. How painful, how difficult, what a tremendous upset and disappointment this catastrophe must have been. So you imagine that at some point they said, how can we make the Seder without the temple? How can we do Pesach without the Korban Pesach? How can we do any of what we're supposed to do in the situation that we're in? And yet they found the strength, they found the inner reserve, and they found the drive to say, we'll tell the story. We can't go to the temple, we can't bring the offering as it's supposed to be, but at least we can tell the story. One of the commentators, the Ohev Yisrael, focuses on the name Bnei Barak. Barak, as you know, is a word for lightning in Hebrew, Barak. So it was in this town, Bnei Barak. They were the sons of lightning, and they were misaper. They were telling the story in one meaning, but they were also sapir. They were illuminating, they were shining a light on the story of Pesach and all the happenings and all the points of the Haggadah. Maybe others say that that's why their students had to come tell them that, it's light outside now, time to come say the Shema, time to come to Shul. It was already light inside for them because they'd been basking in the glow of each other's teachings, each other's Torah. So we draw our strength, some 1950 years later. We draw the strength and the inspiration to sit around our Seder table with our families, with our generations, our family and friends, telling the story, even though it's not as it's supposed to be. last year and certainly 2 years ago from this Pesach, when we were in complete lockdown, families were separated, parents and children couldn't be together because of the fear, the terrible mortal fear that gripped us in those days. Thankfully, we've come a few steps forward. We have a vaccine. We feel like we're learning to live with an endemic rather than a pandemic COVID situation. And we look forward to a day when it'll be light for all of us also, when the darkness and the exile and the alienation and the separation from where we're supposed to be and who we're supposed to be will come to an end, and the light will shine for us also. Another insight I wanted to share with you is about the Korban Pesach itself, the Paschal offering itself. Everyone asks, how is this relevant? What has this got to do with my life? As we just said with the last story, we haven't done this in almost 2,000 years, brought the Korban Pesach. We talked about it in our Talmud class a couple months ago. We speak about it on Erev Pesach. We talk about it on Pesach itself. And yet, what kind of relevance does this have for us today? Why isn't it something of the past? Isn't it dated? Isn't it something that doesn't have much relevance to our lives? So let's take a little bit of a deeper look, a little bit of a deeper dive into what the Korban Pesach is, what the Paschal offering is, and how some of the points of the halachas of this particular offering, this particular sacrifice, really do teach us a lot about what it means to be Jewish, not only in the times of the temple, but really in our times as well. The Korban Pesach, the Paschal offering, is a chok. It's one of those mitzvahs for which a reason isn't given, that it'll prolong the length of your lives, that the civic rules like not killing, not stealing, contribute to a stronger society. Every society needs them, right? This is a mitzvah which we do because Hashem asks us to do it, instructs us to do it, offers us to connect through this mitzvah. And yet, we're not able to do it for so many centuries, hundreds and hundreds of years, almost 2,000 years, as we said. So let's look at the halachas, the particular halachas, and see what insight they might give us. One of the laws of the Korban Pesach is that it has to be eaten in a group. You don't just roast the Korban Pesach and eat it yourself. You eat it together with others, and you're supposed to send invitations beforehand. You're supposed to pre-register, as it were, like we used to do for the last couple of years in Shul. You have to pre-register to be part of a group. That's one halacha. Another one is etzem lo sishberubo. No bone in the korban, no bone in the sacrifice and the offering can be broken. All the bones have to be whole. Another halacha, it has to be roasted. Can't be boiled, can't be fried, can't be cooked, must be roasted. That's the law of the Korban Pesach. Now we have sort of a complementary halacha nowadays in our times, so that we don't appear to be eating a Korban Pesach or anything suitable there too. We make a point not to eat any roasted meat on either of the two Seder nights. But the rule of the Korban Pesach, the Paschal offering, is that it really should be should be roasted. Another halacha, another point of Jewish law connected to this. Anything that's left over, anything that remains, any leftovers. This was the time certainly before Tupperware, before Ziploc and all that. But the halacha is that anything which is left over, anything, it's called nosar, leftover, literally speaking, is considered an abomination. It's called pigul. You're not allowed to eat it, not allowed to use it, has to be destroyed. Can't be fed to the poor, can't be given to anybody else. If it's not kosher for you, it's not kosher for anybody else. Another halacha, the Korban Pesach, the Paschal offering, has to be eaten only on the night of Pesach, which basically makes it impossible for one person to finish it. It's a big animal, a goat or a sheep. No one person could eat all that, even the most competitive eater. You need help. You need other people to finish it off. And one more halacha that we know very well, which is when the Paschal offering is slaughtered, we have to take the blood of the korban, have to take the blood of the offering, and use an agudas ezov, it says, a hyssop branch. We have to take the blood and smear it. We have to spread it, daub it on the mashkof, on the lintel, the crossbar of the entryway to our homes, and on the mezuzot, on the doorposts. So the Maharal gives some insight into these various laws, which seem a little disparate, seem a little bit disconnected maybe, and certainly distant from our lives because we're not bringing the Korban Pesach, and says they really bring out the unifying theme of the togetherness, the unity of the Jewish people, and how we all depend on and need each other. Some cases it's obvious. You can recognize that inviting other people, eating together, and an eating challenge so great that you couldn't do it on your own, all that's connected to the idea of unity, obvious. The same is the case about the requirement that every bone in the offering has to be whole, can't be broken. We can't allow, the Maharal explains, we can't permit any part of the Jewish nation to be broken. Every bone representing every Jew is essential to our existence and to our continuity. There are no throwaways, there are no second stringers, there's no bench. We're all in this together, and no one can be broken. We can't stand by while that happens. We have to help each other and support each other and heal each other. And that idea transfers to the idea of roasting the animal. When you roast meat, my kids who are barbecue fans will tell you, the meat becomes more tightly compacted when it's cooked in that way. If you boil it or if you bake it, it sort of loosens up, falls apart. But when you roast it, it becomes more compact, tighter together. Also relating to that idea that we have to stay close to, not just together, but close together. Also the idea that nosar, leftovers, is an abomination. Okay, every Jewish mother will tell you, clean your plate, finish it all up, right? But this emphasis here that anything left over is an abomination, and it's a strong penalty for nosar, for leftover sacrifice, tells us that we can't leave anybody out. Every Jew is an essential and indivisible part of our nation. There's no such thing as leftovers. There's no such thing as left behinds. Every Jew is important and dear and essential to us. We're all brothers and sisters. When we talk about the Jewish people going out of Mitzrayim, Yisrael, they say that it's an acronym. If you take the first letters of the Hebrew word that spells out Yisrael, they say it's an acronym for Yesh Shishim Riboy Oisias La Torah. There are 600,000 letters in the Torah. We know that 600,000 souls went out of Egypt and were present when the Torah was given, because there's a connection between every letter in the Torah and every Jew. Just like we can't read a Sefer Torah, we can't use a Sefer Torah for any reading. If there's one letter missing or even deformed, if it's flaked off, part of it's flaked off or fallen off, or accidentally been partially erased, the entire Sefer Torah is puzzled. We have to put it aside till we can fix it and take another Sefer, take another scroll of Torah and read that. So the same thing with the Jewish people. Even if one person has an issue or something, we can't ignore that and say, we're reading in another parsha now, we'll deal with you later. We all have to stick together and recognize that without any of us, all of us are incomplete. Lastly is this idea of taking the bundle of hyssop branches and daubing the blood of the sacrifice, of the offering, on the lintel, on the crossbar, and on the mezuzahs, on the side posts of our doors. We hear about things that happen to other people, right? We hear about terrible acts of terrorism in Israel. No one should know from such things. In the last couple of weeks, we've been reading every day horrible, horrifying headlines about a war in Ukraine, not affecting not just the Jewish community there, but everyone there for the last couple of months. Of course, for the last couple of years, we've been living under the cloud of COVID, which has claimed some of our dear friends and family members and community members, right? We live with these and we think about them, but there's a point where we're tempted to sort of leave those at the door. We feel bad, we hear about them, and we move on. This halacha, this rule about taking the blood of the korban, the blood of the sacrifice, and placing it on our doors, that makes it immediate to us, to our lives. It makes us feel the pain as if it were ours, because we're so connected. It's like the Jewish people so intimately connected. It's like different parts of a body. When you stub your toe, it's not just your little toe that hurts, it's the entire body, up to the point of the scream that comes out. Stubbed my toe. But when one part of us hurts, all of us has to hurt. And that's a symbol, that's symbolized or realized by putting the blood on the doorpost. There's a lot of focus on the plagues that hit the Mitzrayim, that hit Mitzrayim, the land of Egypt and the inhabitants of Egypt, and even Pharaoh's house. So we speak about that, and we have to remember, Batenu Hitzil, that our homes were preserved. God saved our families and preserved us and let the force of destruction pass over. That's the name of the holiday. so that we'd be able to continue on with our mission. When, God forbid, there are hard times, tragic, difficult times, we do tend to come together. We stick together, we overlook differences. And then sometimes, to our sorrow, when the tragedy is gone, the unity and the connection is also gone. But if those feelings of concern and feelings of care and goodwill and gemilas chesed that we felt towards each other for the past couple of years intensely and acutely, as we've all grappled with the pandemic, if we can keep those strong and build on those and build our community and our kehila even more closer, even more dependent and intimately interwoven with one another's lives, then we'll get to a point where better days will be ahead for all of us as long as we stick together. On that note, one more story to share with you, a story about potatoes, as my kids would say, or would have said. I'm not sure if this might be passé by now, #relatable. Not sure if we use that terminology anymore, but I think at this time of year, everyone can relate to potatoes. There's a town called Keresztér in Yiddish. My Hungarian is pretty poor. This is a town in northeastern Hungary. Bodrug Keresztúr. How's that for my Hungarian? That's all you're getting for today. This town of Keresztér had maybe a few hundred Jews living in it before the war, but the Keresztér Rebbe, Reb Shaya, or they call him affectionately Reb Shaya Steiner, was the Keresztér Rebbe, and he's revered and remembered with love today, almost 100 years after his passing. He passed away in the mid-1920s. His life was about helping others and making their lives easier. So here's a story that they tell about Reb Shaya 1 year of Pesach. The Jews in the city were cleaning, getting ready for Pesach, get everything together. They spent time at the matzah bakery. They made sure that the matzahs were kosher, mahadran min mahadran. Everything was taken care of. Those who welcomed guests, like Reb Shaya, there were preparations underway. And they came into a problem. Nowadays, we would call it a supply chain problem. We can definitely relate to that, with shortages and high costs and everything else. What was the shortage in those days? Potatoes. That winter, apparently, there had been a terrible blight, some kind of a crop disease that damaged the entire potato crop, and all the potato fields in the region were harmed, destroyed. So it was basically impossible to get any potatoes. What are you going to eat on Pesach if you don't have potatoes? That was the main source of sustenance, probably for the whole year, but certainly at this time of year. So when Pesach came closer, the heads of the city, the community leaders, reached out to neighboring towns and villages to ask, could they procure some potatoes for the residents of Keresztér? Other cities other towns, other communities barely had enough for themselves, and they couldn't spare any. So Reb Shaya, as we said, had a very personal sense of responsibility for the people in his town. He was very worried until he found out about a landowner, a non-Jewish guy who lived in a faraway city and was rumored to have silos full of extra potatoes. So this was a very important mission. This wasn't small potatoes. This was big potatoes. So Reb Shaya didn't want to trust an emissary, didn't want to trust a messenger, a shliach. So he set out on his own, by himself, a couple of days before Pesach, with two of his most trustworthy attendants. They took a wagon, and they filled the back of the wagon with empty sacks so they'd be able to bring back potatoes. Hopefully their mission would be successful. And they brought a suitcase full of cash. Who knew how much this guy was going to hold out for? Who knew how much we would charge? They had to hold out for anything. So they hurried off. They knew they were in a hurry. The wagon driver appreciated that. So after a full day of travel, Reb Shaya came to the place that they were looking for, got down off the wagon with his helpers, and knocked on the door of the landowner's home. The man answered the door. Reb Shaya introduced himself. He said, I'm the rabbi in Keresztér, and we don't have any potatoes, and we need them for Pesach, and I am ready to purchase whatever price you'll charge. I hope it'll be a fair price. The man gave a laugh, and he said, money's not the issue. I'm not after money. I'm not willing to sell, no matter what the price. Shia wouldn't take no for an answer. He needed this for his people. So he told this guy who was being pretty stubborn, he said, you know what? You name the price. I'm ready to pay it. The man said, nothing doing. He made an offer. He doubled the price. He tripled the price. Nothing doing. Could not get anywhere with this potato farmer. Finally, after thinking about it for a few minutes, the landowner said, I'll sell you however much you want. I'll sell you as many potatoes as you want, but my price is going to be very high. I don't know if you'll be willing to pay it. So he felt he was making a breakthrough. Shaila Kerastira said, you tell me the price. What is it that you want? And the guy asked for an impossible price. He said, I'll sell you all the potatoes you want. I'll fill up your wagon to overflowing. And the price is, I want your share, your portion in the world to come. Shaila's two attendants rolled their eyes. They turned around to go. They said, such a ridiculous, obscene request, not going to happen. As they were turning around, they heard the voice of their rabbi saying, it's a deal. You got a deal. Couldn't believe what they're hearing. They looked at their Rebbe and said, you can't be serious. You're gonna sell your chelik in Olam Haba, you're going to sell your share in the world to come for some potatoes? No time to waste. We're in the week of Pesach now. The landowner was very happy that the rabbi agreed, and right away he found a pen and paper. He drew up a contract. He wanted a signed document to prove that the sale was real. And Reb Shaila, with joy, with delight, signed on the dotted line. They were getting ready to leave. Shaila turned to his assistants and said, this is our secret. Nobody back at home is supposed to find out. Nobody's supposed to know. Nobody will find out. You'll keep my confidence. Nobody can find out about this. The next day, they reached the hometown, and the people were beside themselves. You never saw Jews so happy over potatoes. But they knew now they would have enough to feed their families. Everything would be fine, and they would have a happy and kosher Pesach. Reb Shaila himself was expecting 60 people, some 60 guests for meals over the Yom Tov. So the attendants kept their promise as best they could to keep it a secret, but as often happens in such cases, word somehow or other got out. Within a few days after Pesach, everybody in town knew the story. You know how it goes. So a few individuals from the town came to the rabbi and they said, Rabbi, how can it be? How could you have done such a thing? It was important, but was it so important? They said to sell your share in the world to come for a few potatoes. Shaila's answer was very telling and spoke about what kind of person he was. He said, my portion in the world to come has no value. As long as there's a Jew in Kerastir who doesn't have enough to feed himself and his family, what good is my share in Olam Haba? It was totally worth it. So it's a question that comes to us. How important are the feelings and the needs of others in our world? Who are we? We ask ourselves. Are we what we have? Are we what we own? Or are we what we're willing to give? What we're willing to share with others? This holiday, this year, let's push ourselves. Let's extend our feelings of giving. We should give with an open hand. We should give with a full and open heart. We should all enjoy a holiday of plenty, not just in material sense, but in spiritual sense, and all, of course, in good health. Good Shabbos, a good Yom Tov, a Chag Kasher V'Sameach.